It's good to see all of you. We are going to be recording tonight's event, and you are free to talk and unmute yourself right now if you want to say hello before we start recording. But if you have a question later on and do not want to be recorded and later put on YouTube, you can simply type the question in the chat box, and Rachel or I will ask the question for you. So you don't have to be recorded.
Yes, the simple way to avoid being recorded is just to stay muted, and we will be making liberal use of the mute button once we officially get started. But if you do want to ask a question or recommend a book at the end of the event on camera, you can absolutely do that. Just let myself or David know that you're wanting to do that. It does look like the bulk of the people who are in the waiting room have gotten in and gotten settled, so I think we're going to go ahead and get started. So tonight is our night of fun bookseller recommendations. This is one of our favorite things to do in the store. We love to talk to customers and tell you about the great things we've been reading. And tonight we're doing it virtually. So our first bookseller is the delightful Kirstin Swartz. She is a bookseller in our Saratoga store who I miss seeing every single day, but who is here tonight to tell us about some of the great stuff she's been reading lately.
All right, hi everybody. Can I be heard now? Okay, awesome. So I'm Kirstin. I'm a bookseller at the Saratoga store. It's almost been a full year of my employment at the store, and it's been really exciting to be back and being able to help customers in person, but also to be able to still do Northshire live events like this. I've got a couple of recommendations, some fiction, some mystery, well, mostly mystery. So hopefully you guys like the books I'm going to recommend. So one of the first books I'm recommending is Beach Read by Emily Henry. I'm sure most of you have seen this book. It's been on the bestseller list for paperback. I believe it's number 6 right now, last time I saw, but it is so good. When I was able to come back to the store, this is one of the first books I picked up. I read through it in one day. It was fantastic. It looks like a very happy-go-lucky cover and title and description. It's about 2 authors who hate each other, and they're living in lake houses right next to each other by chance for the summer. One's a female romance writer, the other is a male, very serious literary drama writer. But it ends up being a lot more than a light story. It has a lot of depth to it. I really loved the characters' kind of enemies to lovers dynamic. It was one of the few romances. I do love romance. I think that most romance should just be women's fiction, really, but it was one of the few romances that had so much character to it and so many ups and downs and just things that I didn't expect. So it was a pleasant surprise. It's definitely the embodiment of you can't judge a book by its cover. So yeah, I think it's very good. You know, the funny romantic moments are very January, who's the romance writer, and then some of the more dramatic moments where I for sure cried, are definitely the male author Gus's moments. So I just recommend if you want something that's summer, that's romance, but just has kind of a well-rounded story to it. The next book I'm going to recommend is this book called Friends and Strangers. And that is by J. Courtney Sullivan. She's written a good couple of other fiction books that I personally have not read. This is my first of hers. I did read this back like a good few months ago, but I think it's a good summer read as well. Not a quick summer read, definitely something you should take your time with because there's a lot of different themes in it about motherhood, class, coming of age, career struggling, and it focuses on 2 women. One is a new mom. She's moved to a small town in upstate New York, and she lived in the city, and she's just struggling becoming a new mom and having to be away from the city life that she was so used to. And she has a student named Sam, who's a liberal arts student, start taking care of her son, and they end up making this very complicated friendship. So yeah, just a book that's really good, but take your time with, don't rush through. Definitely summer long read. The next book I'm going to recommend actually just came out on Tuesday. It's called Luster, and that is by debut author Raven Leilani. I believe that's how you pronounce her name. Very, very good book. A couple of big names like the New York Times have been talking about it, and it was on the Indie Next list for this month. It genuinely surprised me. The narrative is very abstract, just like the protagonist, Edie. She's a artist, but she doesn't really embrace that. She's never had anyone in her life to really encourage her to go forward with her love of painting, and instead went into publishing, barely struggling with that. After a few poor choices, she actually got fired from that position, and just at her rock bottom moment, she's taken in by the man that she's been seeing and sleeping with, this older middle-aged man, Eric, and also his wife, Rebecca. They're in an open marriage, and they take her in. She's still doing whatever with Eric, getting a weird acquaintance with Rebecca, and then also starting to be kind of a mentor for their adoptive daughter, Akila. Both Edie and Akila are Black, and it's not something that's extremely prominent in the story, but there is big touches on race and big struggles, especially for the daughter Akila, because she is struggling with her race, with white parents living in a white neighborhood and constantly being scrutinized. So it lightly touches on that, but it's mostly about an artist who has very little self-esteem, full of orphan loneliness, and just trying to find herself again. So it was really, really good. Probably one of my favorite books of the year. The next book I'm going to recommend is a mystery called Watching You Without Me, and that is by Lynn Cody. And I picked this book up off the whim because the description was about a young woman named Karen, and she returns to a town in Canada to take care of her developmentally disabled sister Kelly after their mother recently passed away from cancer. I picked it up because I felt a strong connection to it. My brother is also disabled. The character Kelly, who is disabled in the book, they never identify her disability, but the mannerisms and the kind of care she needs is very similar to my brother. So I felt a really strong kinship to the protagonist, Karen, and the struggle with loving your sibling, but wanting to have a life outside of being their caregiver for the rest of their life. And it kind of comes back to bite her, because one of the caregivers that Kelly does have, his name is Trevor, he offers kind of like a very aggressive helping hand to Karen once their mother passes away. And at first she's very grateful for it because she's so lost in her guilt and her confusion on what to do for her sister. But they soon realize that it's a very possessive, very unhealthy relationship that he wants to develop with both of them. So yes, it was a very creepy story. But I think that if you read it, you'll take away from this book the beautiful relationship between the two sisters. And instead of being afraid of bad caregivers in life for the elderly or for the disabled, you'll be really grateful for the good ones. So really enjoyed that book. Made me cry, for sure. I'm also going to recommend Suicide House, which also came out pretty recently. It's set in 2019 and 2020, and it is a campus novel, which has been one of my themes this summer. Just a high school campus, private school, 2 students are murdered horribly. A teacher is suspected and arrested for it. He throws himself in front of a train before he can get arrested, and now he's a hospitalized vegetable. Case is supposedly closed. Over the course of the next year, though, several students who were involved in the attack and murders ended up committing suicide by also throwing themselves in front of the train, in front of this boarding house where the murders happened. So things start to get extremely suspicious. Is the teacher really guilty, or more going on than meets the eye? Super creepy book. If you're a big fan of podcasts, because it's got a podcast aspect to it, true crime podcasts, I think you'd really like this book. Also, a lot of great narratives going on, some from antagonists, some from protagonists. And I think that it will genuinely surprise you. When you think you know what's going to happen in the story, suddenly you don't know it all. So really creepy book. I love creepy books. And then also Blacktop Wasteland is another great mystery. A couple of other booksellers have been talking about this one too. A couple other articles as well. I really enjoyed Blacktop Wasteland. Basically kind of a more serious, more depth, 3-dimensional Fast and Furious style. It's an action thriller, drama, a little bit of everything. And this story is about this man named Bug, who was abandoned by his criminal driver father, ended up getting into the getaway driver lifestyle. But, you know, left it all to get married, to have kids, to be an honest man working at a car shop. But when we find him, he's at a financial low. He can't take care of his kids. He can't keep his shop open. He doesn't know what to do. So when a really sketchy old criminal partner of his turns back up and offers this once in a lifetime jewelry heist that will keep him set for the rest of his life, he makes the decision to jump back in to the crime. And it ends up being a lot more than he thought he can handle. And on top of it being full of action, had very great, beautiful written moments. I thought the writer was fantastic. And it's a very relevant take on the issue of poverty in the country and the way it affects people financially with the decisions that they make, what kind of ultimatums they have to leave themselves. Yeah, so that's pretty much it. I'm just going to give one shout out to this book called The Last Flight. It's been on back order. We never get copies of it in the store. That's by Julie Clark. It's another dual narrative story about two different women who both need to disappear, by chance meet at the airport, and end up switching tickets and identities in order to escape and try to start over. So that's all I'm going to tell you about it. It was so, so good. I hope that it's available for ordering pretty soon. So yeah, that's all the books I have.
So next up, our wonderful adult book buyer, Stan, is going to tell you about some of his picks. So Stan selects which books come into the store in actually both Northshire locations. So he has one of the busiest jobs in the entire store and reads. I don't know how he reads as much as he does, and I read a lot. So welcome, Stan. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Kirstin talked about Blacktop Wasteland. I'm also hearing great things about that. One of our great readers over here in the Vermont store, Alden Graves, also loved that book. It's getting great reviews, so thanks for talking about that, Kirstin. The first book I'm going to talk about came out in the spring. I feel bad for all of the writers who had a book that came out in the spring, but you know, some of them had to. So this one is called Hollywood Park by Mikkel Jolet. It looks like it ought to be Jolet, but it's pronounced Jolet. He's in a band called Airborne Toxic Event that I had never heard of, but I think I'm a little too old to have heard of this kind of band. But this is Mikkel Jolet's memoir. He was born in 1974 in a cult called Synanon in California. It was a very famous, infamous, notorious cult that started out as a drug rehabilitation center. Some famous people went there and apparently got help there. Some jazz musicians, Art Pepper and Joe Pass, went there. But it became a violent and awful place. And this is the environment in which Mikkel and his brother were raised. And in this cult, children are separated from their parents at a very young age and educated separately to become independent thinking people. And when he was 5 years old, his mother busted him and his brother out of Synanon, which is a very dangerous thing to do at the time, because the people who left were called splittees, and they would come after you if you left. But they did leave, and they went into hiding basically in Oregon. And so he and his brother lived with their mother in Oregon, and their father is elsewhere in Southern California. He's a recovered heroin addict. And it is a story about a very, very rough and dysfunctional childhood. And in this story, what was interesting to me is that they eventually go to live with their father when they become teenagers, but their mother is, in a way, the villain in this story. Normally, I would hazard to say that in these sorts of memoirs about troubled families, the father is kind of the bad guy and the mother is the savior. Well, not so much in this one. Now, he does take pains to point out that his mother was dealing with mental illness, but she could not acknowledge what those boys went through. It was always about how hard it was for her. And when they would bring up horrible traumatic things that happened in their past, she would simply tell them that never happened. They do eventually go to live with their father, and he is a pretty good guy, and he demonstrates love to those kids. And they have their drug problems, they have their alcohol problems, eventually Mikkel, when he's in high school, some switch flips for him and he starts to try and he starts to do well. And he graduates from high school with honors. He gets a full scholarship to Stanford. He graduates from Stanford with honors, and just makes quite a life for himself. What I liked about this story is just how people who come from such abused and traumatic backgrounds can not just overcome, but thrive. In a way, it sort of reminded me of Educated by Tara Westover. I bet a lot of you read that book, and I just thought, how did that girl survive? Never mind, achieve what she did. And as I read this book, which takes place in the 1980s and the 1990s, takes place in Oregon and California. There's violence and drug use, and yet I kept thinking about Angela's Ashes as I read this book. It's a very good memoir. The next book I want to tell you about is a novel, maybe one of my favorite novels that I've read this year. It's called Sea Wife by Amity Gage. It also came out in the spring. Sorry, Amity. It is about a family that leaves their comfortable Connecticut lifestyle and they take to the seas. They literally buy a sailboat and they sail the Caribbean. And the father, Michael, is a New York kind of financial guy, and the mother, Juliet, is a very smart, accomplished stay-at-home mother. And they have two little girls, a 7-year-old and a 2-year-old, and they take them on the sailboat, take the 7-year-old out of school, and they go sailing. And there's some wonderful scenes of island hopping off of the coast of Panama, just as ideal as you could imagine, just swimming, and time has no meaning. But you know from the very first page of this book that something goes horribly, horribly wrong, because we meet Juliet in where she's balled up in her closet. So you know that whatever happened out on the sea, something really terrible happened. And so it's a literary novel, but it is also a page turner, because I wanted to languish in her beautiful prose, and yet I couldn't wait to find out what happened out there. And what ultimately it really is about is the crumbling of a marriage. These two, Juliet and Michael, knew each other for a long time. They get married, and yet they never worked out their philosophical and political differences, which is just interesting. And it's told in alternating points of view. Juliet really tells the story, but Michael keeps the captain's log, which tells you what happened on the boat, but it also is sort of a confessional thing for him. It's just written so very well, and I'm trying to think, is there anything else I want to tell you about this? They end up in Cartagena, Colombia, and things go from bad to worse. But it's the writing is what is just really special about Sea Wife by Amity Gage. There it is again. I want to tell you about another book, coincidentally about another book about a woman on a boat. I don't know how that happened. Migrations by Charlotte McConaughey. This book just came out. It's a debut, and it is stunning. It's set in the near future. It is post-apocalyptic, but don't let that turn you off. It doesn't read like it's if you're not into that kind of thing. It doesn't. It reads like it happens in a normal present day, but in this book, there has been environmental catastrophe. Basically, all of the land animals are either extinct or they're living on preserves. There are very few birds left. There are very few fish left. And the hero of the story, Franny Stone, is a woman who has a particular interest and is an expert in Arctic terns. And Arctic terns take the most outrageous migration path of any creature on Earth. Like I thought the wildebeest had the crazy migration. I've watched those nature shows, and if you've ever seen what those poor animals have to go through to get from one place to another, if there is reincarnation, I swear I don't want to come back as a wildebeest. but the Arctic terns literally migrate from pole to pole, 25,000 miles each way, and that's their life. It's just extraordinary. And so the Franny in this book wants to track what are probably the last Arctic terns on Earth, and what is probably their last migration from the north to the south. And so she gets onto one of the last commercial fishing vessels in the world in Greenland and convinces the captain to let her come on board. And she tells him, she has put some tracking devices on 3 Arctic terns. And she says, if we can follow the terns, you'll find fish. And for some reason, he lets her come on. And so it's about that journey, but it really is about Franny's life, because in bits and pieces, you find out that what she's really trying to figure out who she is and where she came from. As a child, her mother disappears at a very young age, doesn't really know who her father is. There is so much awful emotional baggage that you don't know what it is, and so you just have to keep turning the pages to find out. It's unbelievable that it's a debut. She's a fantastic writer, and I absolutely loved it. So that's Migrations. The next book I want to tell you about is another memoir that came out this spring, and it's called Good Boy by Jennifer Finney Boylan. She's written several books, and sorry about that. Her first book that broke her out was called She's Not There, which is about her transition from male to female, which she started transitioning in 2000. And that book is specifically about her life and more broadly about identity and gender. This book is pretty much straight memoir from her childhood years to the present day. And during these periods in her life, the markers are the dogs that she had. She had 7 dogs. And you know, I like dogs. I'm not a dog person. Don't hate me, but like I like the dogs. I'm just not a crazy dog person. And so, in fact, when I ordered this book, we originally categorized it in the dog section, but then I read it, and it's really not a dog book. It's straight memoir. And the dogs themselves, I mean, some of them are okay, but like she had some really lousy dogs, like some really bad habits. And it's kind of funny, but what really kept me turning the pages is just what a fantastic writer she is. You may have, she has like a weekly or an occasional op-ed column in the New York Times. So you might want to, check her out if you haven't read her, but it's just a terrific memoir. And I highly, and if you like dogs, you'll like it even better. And finally, I want to tell you about this book, Owls of the Eastern Ice by Jonathan Slatt. This is great nature writing. Back in the early 2000s, Jonathan Slatt, who was a naturalist and a PhD candidate, was on a birding expedition in Russia, and he happened to see this very rare and elusive owl called the Blakiston's fish owl. It's the biggest owl in the world. I love the owls so much, and that's what drew me to this book. The Blakiston's fish owl is the size of an eagle, 6-foot wingspan, about 2 feet tall. It's an amazing bird, and go online and look at pictures of this thing. It's kind of fluffy and tufted, and it eats fish. And speaking of, as I said earlier, the nature shows, we learned that owls can fly so silently because their wings, their feathers aren't waterproof. Water is like kryptonite to owls, but these guys, they stand on the banks of rivers and streams and get in the water to get their prey. So the author, Jonathan Slatt, developed a PhD project, the goal of which was to come up with a conservation program for these owls. So he goes to this part of Russia. It's near where China and Russia and North Korea come together. This absolutely beautiful and forbidding landscape. And there's a lot of great writing about the natural world in this book. And he puts trackers, I mean, catching these owls finding them in the first place was nearly impossible. And then they have to capture them. Then they had to put the trackers on them. And there's just great scenes of these poor guys like huddled in freezing tents and snowstorms, watching these little monitors, waiting for these owls to show up, and then running out when one shows up and grabbing it and putting the trackers on it. And it's just for people who like natural history and birds, I recommend it highly. There are many colorful Russians in this book. There are a number of saunas are taken. A fair amount of vodka is consumed. But the dedication of these people who are just absolutely determined to help these owls survive when poaching is a problem, for example, it's just amazing. And so that's a good book for the people who like to read nature literature. And that's what I got for you.
Fantastic, thank you, Stan. So just a quick note, I've been adding links and the titles of the books in the chat in case you didn't catch them. We also will be putting up a blog post on our website tomorrow listing all of these titles. So, you know, check back at northshire.com tomorrow about midday on our Notes from the Shire's blog, and there will be a post with all of these if you missed a title and have a question. Or you can always send a message to myself or to Davith in the chat if like there's something that you didn't quite catch. Without further ado, we're going to turn it over to Cassidy, another wonderful bookseller in the Saratoga store who has another great list of books to share with you. Cassidy, you're still muted. You need to unmute yourself.
Working now?
Yeah, there you
Okay,
go.
great.
Okay.
So I'm a bookseller at the Saratoga store, and I have a good selection, I think, here. I have some fantasy, a young adult, we got romance and some mystery in here. So I think there's something for everybody here. But the first one I want to talk about is one that is probably one of my favorite books of the year so far. And it is The Year of the Witching by Alexis Henderson. So this is a debut dark feminist fantasy, but also horror in a way. And it is set in like a puritanical society where the main character is biracial, and she kind of lives on this edge of a forest that is cursed. There supposedly are 4 witches there who have cursed the town, and all these curses, there's 4 of them that start descending, and it's kind of a little bloody, a little dark. There's a lot of mystery behind it, and our main character wants to stop these things from happening, and it just gets pretty intense, and I just found it to be very engaging, and it's really one of those ones that you won't want to put down. You're gonna read it into the early morning. It gives off this kind of creepy atmosphere, and I just thought it was really well-rounded, and I loved the characters in it, especially the main character. And there's like a little touch of the romance. If you like the romance, there's a touch of it in there, but it's super dark, and I found it to be incredible. I'm talking about it to everybody at this point. It's definitely one of my favorites out there. So if you like horror and witches and fantasy, then this would be one for you for sure. So like I said, that was one of my favorite books of the year. I'm going to follow it up with another book that also kind of gives off a creepy atmosphere, and it is Mexican Gothic by Sylvia Moreno Garcia. So this one you might have seen. It has been on the indie bestseller list for a little while now, and it's well-deserved, honestly. So this one is one that is a Gothic horror novel, and it is set in the 1950s. It is about a young woman who gets a letter from her cousin saying that she needs help. They're holding her hostage in this mansion. So her cousin, the main character, ends up going to help her cousin out. And once there, she realizes that this family that her cousin has married into isn't exactly what they seem. They're super creepy. There's this like weird atmosphere around it, and lots of like hints of like maybe poison, like what's going on with the cousin kind of thing. And honestly, it's another one of those ones where you won't know what is going on in it. It's super creepy, super atmospheric. It's going to keep you reading into the night, just like the other book that I mentioned earlier. But it's definitely one of those ones where you won't know what's going to happen, even if you pick up on the hints. I'm pretty good at picking up on things in mystery novels and things like that. So when I saw one of the hints of what's happening in this, it still didn't clue me in to the whole picture, which I think is like phenomenal. So yeah, it's super atmospheric. It's definitely one of those ones if you're looking for like a kind of creepy atmospheric read. I think you would really enjoy this one. So I would recommend Mexican Gothic. Okay, we're gonna switch over to a YA novel now, young adult novel. Got the creepy ones out of the way. We're gonna move to some more lighthearted ones now. So the next one I want to recommend is Clap When You Land by Elizabeth Acevedo. I think that's how you pronounce her name. But this is a young adult novel that's told entirely in verse, so it's almost like you're reading poetry in a way. This author is a favorite of the Northshire bookstores. Everybody loves her. This was the first one that I've read of hers, actually, and now she's definitely at the top of my list to get all of her other books because I need to read more from her. But this one is about these two sisters who have no idea that the other exists. One lives in the Dominican Republic and one lives in New York City, and her father every year would travel between the two of them without the other knowing that that's what he was actually doing. So one year on his way to the Dominican Republic to visit the daughter who lives there, his plane crashes and there are no survivors there. So ultimately his two daughters end up realizing what is going on. They find out that they have a sister, and it's just one of those ones where it's emotional because the two sisters are now like, oh, I have a sister that's amazing, but you had everything, I had nothing, Dad spent more time with you, not with me. So it's one of those ones where they're kind of like switching between the two emotions. So it's pretty emotional, but there's a lot of hope in this book, a lot of love, a lot of grief. Of course, their father has passed away, but I think it was definitely one of those ones that will bring a reader to tears, as it did to me. So if you like that kind of stuff, I would recommend this one, especially because it was pretty powerful as well. And I really, really enjoyed it. So she's now on the top of my list to get more of her books. Another one of my favorite books of the year right there. So now we're going to go on to a romance book. This one is Take a Hint, Danny Brown by Talia Hibbert. So I have not read a Talia Hibbert book before this one, but I will definitely be reading more now. This one is super fun, super lighthearted, a friends to lovers romance. If you're into romance, you have to pick this one up. It's super engaging, and the characters are definitely lovable. We have the main character, Danny Brown, who's this Black bisexual. She's just so spunky. She works as a professor at a college, and then we have Zafir, who is the I guess security guard at one of her locations, and they're friends at first, and then eventually they become lovers. But it's one of those ones that's fun. It has like I said, friends to lovers romance, but it also has the fake romance trope in it, where they kind of pretend to be in a relationship in order to help promote Zafir's what do you call it? I'm like missing my words here, but yeah, it's to help Saphir grow his company and things like that. So inevitably it does become a real relationship, but it's super cute, super fun, definitely a great summer read, and I would highly recommend this one for sure. I'm going to be checking out more of Talia Hibbert's books. She has another one before this called Get a Life, Danny Brown, or Get a Life, Chloe Brown, which follows Danny's sister. So I'm definitely going to check out more of her stuff because I really enjoyed this one. I pretty much read it in a day. It was super fun. Now we're going to talk about Sex and Vanity by Kevin Kwan. So Kevin Kwan is the author of the Crazy Rich Asians series. If you've ever read that series or even seen the movie, this is the guy. He wrote it. It's pretty similar to the Crazy Rich Asians series in the sense of it's over the top, very dramatic. You kind of have to know that going into it, otherwise it's just going to be total chaos. But it is about our main character who goes to her cousin's wedding on the island of Capri, and at the time she's 19, and she ends up meeting this young man named George, and they kind of have like a summer fling, almost a enemies to lovers kind of thing. They don't like each other at first, and I think it's like 5 or 6 years later, after the events of what happened on the island, they kind of grew apart, but 5 or 6 years later, they find each other again, and at the time, our main character is already engaged to somebody else and kind of has to make life choices and dealing with her family who are just extreme. She's actually biracial as well. I believe she's Chinese and white. So she has to deal with the white side of her family, which kind of shows a little racist themes towards her, which there was a great line in this that mentioned how you can still love somebody and also kind of show racist tendencies to it, and I'm like, that's pretty true. But yeah, she kind of has to deal with that side as well as kind of growing into herself, so it kind of had to do with identity as well as the little romance in this. But like I said, it's so dramatic and so over the top, but like that's exactly what Kevin Kwan wanted for this, and that's exactly what you should expect. And I could definitely see this one becoming a movie as well, just like Crazy Rich Asians did, because I loved that movie. So I hope this one does as well, because I can see that. But super dramatic, super fun, definitely a great summer read as well. And then the final one that I want to talk about here is one of my favorite mysteries of the year, which is The Guest List by Lucy Foley. So if you are a fan of Agatha Christie at all, or And Then There Were None, this is perfect for you because it is about a couple who are going to be married on an island off the coast of, I think it's either Ireland. Yes, Ireland, off the coast of Ireland. And they have this small wedding party that goes with them to stay on the island. And then obviously their guests will come and show up. But in the beginning, you realize that someone has been murdered. What's great about this is you don't know who has been murdered, and obviously you don't know who the murderer is. It is told through the perspectives of multiple people, all who are attending the wedding or are a part of the wedding party. So you kind of get their little backstories, and then of course you're just like, okay, which one of these people is capable of murder? But then you never really know it. But it was really suspenseful. I honestly didn't see the ending coming whatsoever. It was very surprising for me, and I just really enjoyed this one, and I think a lot of people would really enjoy it just because it is very similar to a lot of great mysteries out there currently. So those are the 6 that I recommend.
Fantastic list, Cassidy. Thank you.
Yay.
I do think that David has one quick event-related recommendation that he wanted to chime in about for an author who's actually going to be part of our Northshire Live events next week.
I do indeed. I just finished, this is backwards, A Burning by Megha Majumdar. And it's a phenomenal novel. I'm really looking forward to interviewing her on Tuesday at 5 p.m. right here. Yeah, it's really great. It's a great story. There's these 3 terrific narrators, and it does really cool things with the story, how it comes about, how you find out what's going on. They're each really sort of entrancing in different ways, and it's really topical too. It's about terrorism, about justice, about social media. I highly recommend it, and if you're interested, Tuesday we'll be talking to her.
Which is very exciting that we get to talk to her. So we have a little bit of time left. So I thought that we could use this time for two different possible things that people might want to do. One, sometimes people in the audience have books that they would like to jump in and recommend, which is fantastic. You can do that in the chat and we'll read it out. Or if you want to be on camera, you can do that. No pressure, you do not have to do either of those things if you don't want to. Also, if you have questions, like, you know, I'm looking for a book, what I really want to read is Civil War history or whatever, you can play a little bit of Stump the Booksellers and see if there are things that you're looking for, and we can try to come up with answers and thoughts on what might be a good suggestion. So feel free to either use the chat or send a message in the chat to myself or Davith letting us know that you would like to be unmuted so that you can be on camera and part of the recording for, you know, making your recommendation or asking your question. I'm not seeing anything. I'm trying to think if I have any great recommendations, and unfortunately most of the things I've been reading lately are not coming out till the fall, so it's too far off to tease you guys with. I guess I could show you, hold on, I'm going to disappear for 1 second. I'm going to show you the thing. I just started it. I'm only like 2 pages in, but it seems fantastic so far. I'm going to share that with you.
While Rachel is pulling that in the chat, Janet Stewart recommends Hamnet by Maggie O'Farrell. She said she just finished it and it's one of the best portraits of grief I have ever read. That's one's about Shakespeare's son, I believe. I don't know of any other Hamnets.
Yes, that's right. Tremendous reviews for Hamnet. I want to read that too.
Speaking of tremendous reviews, Dwight Garner's review of Cast made me want to go read that immediately. Isabel Wilkerson's new book. I'm going to be buying that on Monday when I go to the store. Rachel, go ahead. Take it away.
Oh, sorry. I was just typing in the information on Hamnet. I'm trying to do 2 things at once.
Sorry, I can do that. You can show us.
There we go. So there's Hamnet. And this is Cinderella is Dead. Which it's another YA novel, which I highly recommend reading YA for adults and teens.
I second that.
A very creepy take on the Cinderella story, and I'm only a teeny bit in, but I'm liking it a lot. Also, I wanted to say Maggie O'Farrell, the author of Hamnet, is I mean, she's just an amazing, amazing writer, and there's a book of hers that is super old, that is one of the most incredible sort of novels on dementia and also reproductive freedom that I've ever read. It's called The Vanishing Act of Esme Lennox. And it's a book, I read it a few years back, and it just staggered me in the best possible way. I have not stopped thinking about it in all the years since I read it. I'm gonna put that in the chat too. We don't have it in stock right now. It is a much older title. It's from 2008, so we don't happen to have it on the shelves right now, but it's one that we could easily order if anyone would.
We'll order it in.
Oh, thank you, Stan. It's so good. If you haven't read it, you would love it. It's just brilliant.
If we're talking about old books, I just started another one that I will also grab as Rachel is typing that in the chat. And that is you can't see this again, it's backwards. C.L.R. James's The Black Jacobins, Toussaint Louverture, and the San Domingo Revolution. I'm not very far into it, but it's amazing. It's our history of the first Third World Revolution, and it's from the 1930s, and he revised it in the 60s, and it's still a really powerful book. I'm learning crazy new things and all kinds of stuff, and entertaining my family members with stuff. It's a powerful history book.
David, you're going to have to put that one in the chat because I did not catch it. I was looking something up. But we have a couple more great suggestions in the chat. My Dark Vanessa by Kate Elizabeth Russell, which I've heard really good things about. And then Carol Chess, congratulations, Carol. Her daughter has a new book out called Play Like a Feminist, coming out on the 18th. So yay, Carol, that's awesome. And yay, your daughter. Is that her first book, Carol? You can tell us in the chat if you've, nope. Very cool.
Beth said something about humorous recommendations. I don't know anything about Dear Committee members, but you know, I am big on mystery, so I'm sorry if I have so many mystery recommendations, but a mystery that I thought was also really, really funny, As Pretty as a Picture. I think it's a really great book for people who are kind of cinephiles and love kind of, not like parodies of filmmaking, but a humorous take on filmmaking. And the protagonist, her name is Marissa. She's a film editor for this movie that's being filmed on this remote island with a creepy hotel on it. And it's based off of a real murder. She comes in and she has this really quirky humor that literally nobody except one person in the book thinks is actually funny, but I think that she was hilarious. So it was a very lighthearted mystery with a lot of great puns, funny jokes, and despite it being a murder mystery, really, really good, really humorous.
Also, what you liked about Dear Committee members was the satire specifically of a college setting, which, I mean, who doesn't love satire of a college? Jane Smiley's Moo is a really fantastic one. It's set at a sort of rural farm college. I'm blanking on the land grant. It's at a land grant college in the, I think, English department, and it made me laugh out loud more than once. Jane Smiley is one of those writers who can do pretty much anything. She writes historical fiction, she writes contemporary fiction, she's for literary, I think she's been a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize, and Moo was her first sort of academic satire, and it's absolutely brilliant. That might be another one that we don't currently have in stock because it's also one that's been out for quite a long time.
That one's called Moo U with the letter U there at the end of it. It's really good too. There's a question here also in the chat from Denise. She says, she read with her 12-year-old son, book for, I read with my 12-year-old son, and we are so sad that they're getting to the end of the Wings of Fire series. Do you have any other recommendations for another great series like that? They also loved The Girl Who Drank the Moon and Gregor the Overlander.
Ooh, this is my sweet spot because I have kids that age too. So this is not actually something that I have read. But interesting fun fact about the Wings of Fire series is that Lee Sutherland got started as a ghostwriter for Aaron Hunter's
Warriors.
Yes, thank you, Warriors series. So kids who like Wings of Fire often also really like Warriors because it is actually, unbeknownst to most people, the same author. So that is a great thing to check out. There are about 11 million of the Warriors books, and they are, you know, so that you may want those to be something your kid reads on their own as opposed to a read aloud, because you'll be going for like the next decade if you read those aloud. I love, there's a series that's actually sort of in progress by Santani Dasgupta. That would be great. And I'm just looking up the title. It's Kiran Mala and something. And I'm just looking it up as we go.
Rachel, as you're looking that up, I believe Linda has a recommendation. Linda Johnson.
The Redwall series by Brian Jakes.
So good.
And it's like 20 books. And they're good for adults as well as the kids.
I loved those when I was littler.
And then the humor book, there's by Frederick Bachman, the same guy who wrote A Man Called Uwe. He wrote a book the title is something like Things I Want My Son to Know Before He Enters the World, or something like that. And it is slap the knee hilarious. For instance, when it comes to getting something off your child's face, you should spit into a handkerchief or something and then onto the, put it on the face, not spit into the face. And then I put in the comments about both Kathleen Rooney's new book and Stephen Kiernan's finally out. So that's Universe of Two by Stephen Kiernan, which I think would be a good book club book, to a good discussion. And then Kathleen Rooney's book takes place in World War I, and half the chapters are told by a pigeon who really existed and is now mounted in the Smithsonian. And the other chapters are narrated by Major Whittlesey. And the name of the book is Cher Ami and Major Whittlesey.
Thanks so much, Linda. It's fun to hear from you. Kirstin said let me know if you're interested in any campus-themed novels. And I used to read those a lot back in an earlier life, and I really enjoyed them. So what are some recent ones?
So The Suicide House was the one I just recommended during this book chat. That's high school campus themed, but because it's a boarding school, it feels a lot more serious, and all the narration is pretty much grown up, so it's not too young themed. But other ones that I read earlier this year, Catherine House has been a really big hit at Saratoga bookstore, especially. Myself and my coworkers Becky and Patrick read it. We all loved it. It's super creepy, super creepy. And half the time I wasn't sure what was going on, so it really kept me on my toes. And that was a 4-year college type of campus theme. Ghost of Harvard, I did on the first Bookseller Book Chat we did virtually back in May. I think that was when I recommended it. Came out in the beginning of May. And this, I think, is a great introduction to mystery for kind of new adult style, like someone who's growing out of most of YA and going towards more grown-up mystery. So it's a very good in-between. The protagonist is an 18-year-old starting her first year at Harvard after her brother, who had schizophrenia, committed suicide on the campus the previous semester. And she's going in half excited about starting off school, half still grieving her brother, trying to figure out what happened with that. Is there ghosts, or does she have schizophrenia like her brother? So there's a lot of ifs and what is happening in that. The Truants is also another campus novel I read earlier in the year, and that was set, I believe, in England, and it's super Agatha Christie inspired. They're taking Agatha Christie courses. They discuss a lot of her literature and her biography in the book, but it also has its own mysteries going on throughout. So really loved those books.
And going back to the kids' books, the fantasy series, I was thinking of the first book in that series is called The Serpent's Secret. And it's by Sayantani Dasgupta. It's a wonderful series. And that's the first book, and we'll take you through from there. And I would definitely recommend that as a read aloud. Or Grace Lynn's Where the Mountain Meets the Moon would be another great one. And then there is also a note from Victoria saying that coming out next week, The Doctor of Aleppo was excellent. And Stephanie said that her kids loved The Chronicles of Ancient Darkness. They read every one together, gripping, imaginative. All these years later, I can't stop thinking about it. And I'm just adding The Ghost of Harvard into the chat. Also for the comment looking for humor back a while ago, Sarah Vowell, I don't know if people have read her. She's not quite as popular as she was a few years back. She's one author who consistently makes me laugh out loud. She writes nonfiction. She was, I think, a regular guest on Fresh Air for a while, and it's nonfiction history, but it's like nothing you'll ever encounter. Her book, Assassination Vacation, is my favorite. She actually follows, she goes on this elaborate road trip visiting sites connected to American presidential assassinations, and then writes about those presidents and their assassinations, which does not sound like a barrel of laughs. And she's very, I mean, she's very tender and sincere about the lives lost, but she's very, very funny about her travel mishaps. So it's a very fun one. David, perhaps you could share this comment from Marguerite while I add those other things into the chat.
Yes, I missed the Marguerite comment. Well, Marguerite, where's your comment?
Oh, it came to me directly. That's why you don't see it. Never mind, I will share it here. Ellie Griffiths has 2 great new mysteries this summer. The Lantern Men, which features her archaeologist detective Ruth Galloway, which is an Edgar Award winner, and then a standalone called The Stranger Diaries. And I'm just looking for Grace Lynn's Where the Mountain Meets the Moon, which is amazing middle grade fantasy that sort of weaves Chinese folktales with sort of the conventions of a Western fantasy novel, and comes together in this incredibly complicated, shocking way at the end. It's really a delight.
Daphne?
Yes, Marguerite?
Are we gonna have a mystery book club again?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, are you doing the one with on Zoom with Louise?
No, we haven't had a meeting since March, I think.
Well,
May I just speak up for us mystery readers who buy a lot of books?
I'm happy to set up Zoom events. Who's in charge of that mystery group? And I'm happy to.
Well, it used to be Sarah Knight, but I think she's retired.
Well, I'll see what I can do. Let's email and we'll talk about it.
Oh, okay, because all these books sound great, but they're not real hardcore mystery lover mysteries. You know what I mean?
Sounds great. Yeah, we'll figure something out. Yeah, with the classic mystery group, I've helped them set up Zooms, so I'm happy to help with the other one too. And I unless anyone has anything else, it's about time. It's about 6 p.m. I don't want to hold anyone too longer. Beth says, Rachel, Assassination Vacation is terrific. It sounds fantastic. I want to.
It is so good. It's so so good. Also, there was mention of Mulan books, that Grace Lynn also has a Mulan book. There's a wonderful Mulan novel by Sherry Thomas called The Magnolia Sword, a YA novel that is just stunning. I'm pulling that, or I'm actually just going to type the title into the chat so that I remember it.
Spin the Dawn is also one of those ones, like a Mulan. Spin the Dawn is a YA retelling of Mulan as well, which is good too, if anybody loves Mulan.
Fantastic. Okay, adding those so that I get them into the blog post tomorrow. We are, in fact, just about out of time. Thank you so much, everyone. These are some great lists. Again, a reminder that I will be putting these, or Davith, I think, will be putting these onto the Northshire blog, Notes from the Shire, tomorrow. So you'll have all of these recommendations in one handy dandy place. You can also always email us at events@northshire.com if you have questions or things you got sort of stuck on. Davith and I share that email address, and between pandemic life and children and all of the things going on, we will definitely try to get back to you and figure it out. Thank you all so much for being here. This was a lot of fun. Thank you so much, Kirstin, Stan, and Cassidy, for taking the time to do this. We really, really appreciate it. And have a lovely rest of your evening, everybody.
Thank you all so much. It's been fun.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you all.